A human who loved the alien nobody else would asterisk far away from Earth. There was a small moon with cold winds and dark skies, and this moon was quiet and empty until one day something strange happened in the sky above this moon. There was a ship flying, fast but broken and on fire. It was falling from the sky like a star with no light, and it crashed into the rocks and snow with a loud sound that shook the ground. From the broken ship came a small alien with thin arms and big eyes and blue skin that looked soft and weak. The alien was young and alone, and her name was Carrie, but nobody knew her name, yet not even the people who would find her later. She cried quietly and looked up at the moon sky, hoping someone would help her, but no one came for a long time. When a patrol ship finally found the crash, they saw the broken ship and the little alien sitting in the cold, holding her knees and shaking, but they did not see a child. They saw a threat, they saw danger, they saw a member of a race they feared and did not understand. They pointed their guns and shouted in fear, and they locked her up without asking her name or where she came from. They put Carrie in a small glass room on a space station high above a gas planet. She was watched by cameras and guards and was not allowed to speak. She had no translator, so no one knew her voice and no one cared to learn. They fed her once a day through a slot in the wall, and they turned off the lights when she cried too loud. At night, the people on the station whispered stories about her. They said her kind was dangerous. They said her race caused wars and burned colonies and destroyed cities. They said her eyes were fake and her tears were lies. They called her a monster, and worse, and they told new workers to stay far from the lower decks where she was kept. Carrie listened to all of this through the walls. She could not understand every word, but she knew the meaning of fear and hate and loneliness. She could feel it like cold air on her skin and in her bones. She missed her family, who never got out of the crash, and she wished someone would come and ask her if she was okay, but no one ever did. She drew pictures on the glass with her fingers, and dust she drew stars and hands and small shapes that looked like her family. She made up songs in her head with no words, only sounds that helped her sleep a little. She counted the lights above her bed every night and whispered to herself in her own soft alien voice. The guards ignored her. They joked about how long she would last before they sent her to the mining colony where most prisoners were sent. She was not a prisoner, but to them she was not a person either, just something they had to guard until the next order came. One day a new person came to the station. His name was James Carter, and he was a human from Earth. He was a repairman, and a good one. He wore a simple suit and carried tools and smiled at everyone he met. He liked to work alone, and he loved quiet places, so when they gave him a job in the lower decks, he was happy. While fixing the power lines near the cells, he saw her for the first time. Carrie was sitting in the corner of the glass room, her head down, her hands in her lap, and she looked up only when she heard the sound of tools tapping metal, and when she saw him. She did not move, she did not smile, she only looked with tired eyes that had cried too. Much James froze for a moment. He had heard the stories about the alien in the glass cell. He had expected something big and scary, but what he saw was a small figure with soft eyes and no light in them. He blinked and looked again and felt something strange in his chest. It was not fear, it was not hate, it was something else, something quiet and deep. He did not speak to her, and she did not speak to him, but the moment stayed in his mind long after he left the lower deck. He kept thinking about those eyes and that silence that felt louder than any scream. And he asked the question to himself again and again, why was she there, and why did no one care? The next day he came back with more tools, but he also brought a small red light. It was old and broken, but he fixed it and placed it near the glass, so it glowed soft and warm. Carrie looked at it, then looked at him, and for the first time she moved closer to the glass and tilted her head just a little. James smiled and nodded and left without a word, and Carrie held the red light close to her chest. And for the first time in many weeks she did not cry when the lights went out. The station floated in silence above the blue gas giant, with its rings shining below like silver fire and its dark steel walls full of humming machines and quiet footsteps. Inside the station, people worked and ate and slept without thinking much about the things they passed every day, the flickering lights, the creaking pipes, and the old doors that always stuck. But James Carter noticed everything. He was a human from Earth with sharp eyes and a quiet heart. He did not speak much, but he listened well. He fixed things that others gave up on, and he remembered small sounds like the hum of wires or the faint click of a failing lock. He had a habit of working late When the station was almost asleep and the halls were empty one night, as he walked the lower corridor with his toolkit in hand, he passed the door marked Level 9 Restricted Access. It was the place the guards always talked about in low voices. The place where the alien was kept, the alien that nobody wanted to see. He had seen her once through the glass, only for a few seconds, but those seconds stayed with him. He kept thinking about her eyes, not just how big they were or how strange, but how tired, how alone they looked, not like a monster, not like a killer, just like a child who had nothing left. James could not forget, so he started taking the long way around every night, always passing that door, always listening for sounds on the other side, even though the guards warned him not to go near it. They said the alien could read minds, that she could twist thoughts and make you feel things that were not real, but James did not believe them, not fully, not yet. One night the lights above the lower deck flickered again, just like before, and the repair orders came through his tablet. He walked slowly to the door, checked the power lines, then sat down beside the glass wall where she was. Carrie sat in the corner as always, her arms around her knees, her eyes half closed, but when he sat down, she lifted her head and looked at him. There was silence. She tilted her head slightly, not in fear, not in anger, just curious, like a bird watching the wind or a lost star watching the sky. James reached into his tool bag and pulled out a small round device. It was a heat lamp, old and scratched, but warm when it worked. He had fixed it in his spare time, not for her, not at first, just something to do something with purpose. But now he placed it gently on the floor outside her cell and turned it on. A soft red glow filled the space like a candle in the dark. Carrie's eyes blinked slowly, and then she moved a little closer. Her thin fingers touched the glass where the light shined. She did not speak, she could not, but her body stopped shaking. James leaned back against the wall and sighed without a word. He stayed there for a long time until his shift ended. The next night he returned again, and this time he brought something new, a tiny speaker with music, soft notes from earth-old songs his mother used to play during storm, songs without words, only sound like falling water and wind through trees. He placed it near the glass and watched. Carrie did not move at first. Then slowly she lay down beside the glass, her face turned toward the music, her eyes half closed. Not afraid, not alone. Every night James came back. He brought small things, a soft cloth, a new light, a drawing made with chalk on the floor, a star map, a mirror. Not because he was told to, not because he had to, but because it felt right. And every night Carrie watched him, and little by little she changed. She stopped sitting in the corner. She started drawing with her fingers on the glass pictures of stars and planets and strange creatures. James did not understand them, but he smiled at every one. He never spoke, and she never answered, but their silence was not empty. It was full of something new, something quiet and kind. One night, as James packed his tools to leave, Carrie placed her hand against the glass, palm flat, fingers wide. James paused, then placed his hand on the other side, just the same size, not the same shape, but the same message. Saw her eyes again, not as tired, not as lost. There was still pain, but also a light, something small, something growing. When he left that night, he looked back once and saw her still watching him, still holding the light he gave her, and in that moment, James knew something was wrong with this place. Not just the wires, not just the broken doors, but something deeper, something inside the walls, something about how they treated the girl behind the glass. She was not a danger, she was a story untold, a voice unheard, a heart still beating in the dark, and someone had to see her, someone had to care, and James Carter did. The days passed like shadows, moving slowly through the narrow halls of the station. The stars outside did not change, but something inside the lower deck began to shift. Something quiet and warm, like light seeping through cracks in the cold metal walls, and that something lived between a human and an alien who had never spoken a word. James Carter returned every evening, even after his shift was over, even after the warnings from the guards and the strange looks from the officers. He brought pieces of old machines, gears and wires and blinking lights that served no real purpose except to glow and move and make Carrie smile. He watched her reactions closely every time he placed something new near the glass. He never asked anything in return, never forced her to respond. He only offered what he had: small gifts, small moments, and soft music that echoed through the quiet space like wind in a forgotten cave. Carrie watched from her corner, her eyes wide and waiting. She did not move too fast. She did not speak, but each time James came back, she moved a little closer to the glass, and when he sat down beside her on the other side, she sat. Too, they sat in silence, often for hours. James worked with his hands, fixing things that did not need. Fixing wires that hummed, just fine screws that were not loose. It was not the machines he cared about anymore. It was the presence on the other side of the glass, the one no one else dared to see. One night James brought something different. It was a sheet of clear plastic and some dry markers from an old supply bin. He placed the sheet against the glass and drew a circle, then a star, then a smiling face, and waited. Kari looked confused at first, her head tilted, her eyes blinking slowly, but then she reached up with one hand and touched the plastic, her fingers shaking just a little, and she drew a small shape, a star with many arms like the suns of her homeworld. James smiled and drew another shape, then another. Kari copied him, then added her own. Soon the glass was full of drawings, stars and flowers and planets and faces, some human, some not, some happy, some sad, but all alive with color and hope. The guards did not stop him, they just shook their heads and walked away, muttering about fools and pets and soft hearts, but James did not hear them, not really. His ears were filled with the silent sound of trust growing like a tree in the dark. Kari began to change, not fast, not loud, but slowly. She stood taller, her eyes brighter. She cleaned her corner and folded the thin blanket they gave her. She ate all her food and drank all her water, and when James came near, she sat waiting with a tiny spark in her eyes. One evening, as James placed a tiny glowing stone near the glass, Kari pressed her hand to the window again, just like before, and James did the same, but this time she closed her eyes and leaned her forward against the cold barrier, and James felt something in his chest, a pull, a weight, a truth he could not name. She trusted him. He was the first to see her not as a thing, not as a prisoner, but as a person, as someone real, someone worth kindness, someone worth time and care, and in return, she gave him something too, not words, not sounds, but presence, a calmness, a meaning he had not felt in years. They began to share stories in their own way. James would draw pictures on the plastic and point and smile, and Kari would draw her own and nod or shake her head or laugh softly without a sound. He showed her earth, trees and oceans and birds and dogs. She showed him her world, moons with blue skies and rivers that glowed at night and tall creatures that flew without wings. He began to understand her, not her words, but her feelings, her memories, her fears. She had lost more than her family. She had lost her voice, her place, her home, and all she had now was this glass box and a human who kept coming back. James knew he could not leave her there forever. Something in his heart told him the station would not protect her. Something felt wrong. The silence around her cell was too thick, the eyes of the guards too cold, the files he had seen too hidden, too redacted, but he said nothing, not yet, not to the officers, not to the crew. He only sat with her each night and gave her what he could: time, attention, respect. One night, Kari drew a strange shape on the glass, a star with a broken side and a small dot moving away from it. James looked at it for a long time, then drew a tiny ship beside it and a human figure inside. Kari looked at him, then nodded once slowly. She understood, and he understood too. The friendship had no name, no words, no promises, but it was real, and it was strong, and it had already begun to change them both. Asterisk, the stars outside blinked like tiny fires burning in silence, while inside the station the nights grew colder, not in temperature, but in feeling. Something unseen moved in the air like a quiet storm waiting to break, and James Carter felt it, even if he could not name it. Kari continued to meet him every evening, always with the same quiet eyes and gentle drawings on the glass. They never spoke, they never needed to. The silence between them was strong enough to hold meaning, and over time her sadness had softened just a little, like ice touched by the sun. But others began to notice. The guards who once ignored the lower deck started to watch him longer than before. Their eyes followed him down the hall, and their words came sharp and bitter like knives behind soft smiles. They said he was wasting time. They said she was not worth it. They said he should stop before it became a problem. James said nothing in return, but their voices stayed in his mind long after he walked away. One afternoon, while fixing a broken panel in the station archive, James found a file buried deep in the old logs. It was marked private and old, but it was not locked. Curiosity pulled him closer, and he opened it with a slow breath. The words inside made his chest feel tight and heavy. It was a report from the day Kari's ship crashed. It said the alien Vessel had not fired any weapons, had not sent any threat signals, had not broken any law. It had simply moved through the outer system on a quiet course when the station's defense system launched and attacked. The order had come from above, far above the station command. Someone had feared Carrie's people without cause. Someone had seen her kind as danger without proof and fired first, and now they kept the last survivor in a glass cage far from the truth. James read the report twice, his hands cold, his heart pounding. He thought of Carrie's small frame, her shaking hands, her sad eyes. He thought of the stories told about her and how none of them were real. He knew he had to be careful. That evening he brought nothing, just himself and a quiet mind. Carrie sat by the glass waiting, but James did not smile this time. He sat down slowly and drew a small square on the plastic, then a line across it like a secret hidden behind walls. Carrie looked confused, then worried. Her hand reached for the glass, but James gently shook his head. He pointed to her, then to the stars, then to the station, then back to the broken square. She stared at him for a long time, her fingers tapping lightly against the window, as if counting each silent thought in her mind. Then she drew a new shape, a bird in flight, and a tear beside it. James nodded, once slow and sure. The next day the commander called James into his office. The room was small, with walls that hummed low and lights that never blinked. The commander sat stiff and cold, like a machine, pretending to be human. His voice was smooth, but sharp like ice on metal. He asked James about his time on the lower deck. He asked why he visited the alien so often, why he spent hours there alone, what he hoped to gain from it. James answered simply. He said he was doing his job, checking systems, maintaining power, nothing more. The commander stared at him for a long time before leaning back and folding his arms. He warned James not to get involved, not to form bonds, not to think of the alien as anything but what she was, a problem in a box waiting for removal. He said higher orders were on their way and soon the cell would be empty. James left the office with his head down, but his thoughts raced like fire across dry fields. He returned to his quarters and sat in the dark for hours, thinking, planning, remembering every small thing Carrie had shown him, every shape, every look, every silence. That meant more than words. He made a choice that night. He would not let them take her, not without trying. He spent the next days working quietly, storing parts, hiding tools, building something piece by piece, something small, fast, and quiet, something that could leave the station without alert, something meant for one passenger every night. He visited Carrie just the same, drawing, smiling, bringing soft lights and music, and each time he added one more piece to the picture of escape, a tunnel, a pod, a map through the stars. Carrie watched each line grow with care and fear and hope, all mixed together like colors in water. The station around them remained unaware, cold and blind to the bond forming right beneath their feet, but the danger grew with every passing hour, and James knew he was running out of time. So did Carrie. Only evening, as the last light blinked in the hall, Carrie pressed her hand to the glass, not just for comfort but for goodbye, and James did the same, not with words but with the weight of everything they had shared in silence. They had never spoken, but they understood, and the storm was coming. The stars kept shining beyond the station walls, glowing like quiet watchers, while inside the metal corridors the air grew heavier with each day. Whispers moved like wind between the guards, like smoke that could not be caught, words about orders from above, about transfer protocols, about final steps that had no return. James Carter heard them all. He walked past the guards with calm steps and careful eyes, never letting them see the storm rising in his mind. He nodded when they looked at him. He smiled when they questioned his presence, but deep inside he was building something more than a machine, more than a plan. He was building hope. He worked alone in the old cargo bay, a forgotten place where dust gathered on steel and wires hung like old vines. He gathered broken drone parts, repurposed fuel cells, and melted metal plates into something new, something hidden inside a stack of crates, something that looked like junk but was far more than it seemed. He called it the shell. It was a small escape pod shaped like a freight container, dark on the outside, silent within. It had no station tag, no traceable signal, no link to the main grid, only raw engines and a single seat, wrapped in shock pads made from torn blankets and foam. James worked in secret, using his late shifts as cover, building the pod piece by piece, while checking security patterns, while mapping the hallways, while memorizing guard routes and camera times. His mind never rested and his hands never stopped moving. At Night, he went to Kari like always, but now their drawings told a new story, not one of stars and music, but one of tunnels and exits and countdowns. James used shapes and symbols to show her the path to freedom, and Kari listened with wide eyes and trembling fingers. He drew the air vents and the lift shaft and the service panel that opened near the lower deck storage room. She copied them until she could draw them without looking, until she knew each corner, each turn, each light and shadow. By heart, James gave her a thin strip of metal, small and sharp enough to unlock her cell door during system checks. He showed her how to use it, how to slide it, just right, how to wait for the blink that meant the lock had entered test mode. He gave her a tiny cum bead no bigger than a grain of rice, something he built from scrap, and hidden inside a rubber piece of fruit. He knew the guards would not look inside. Kari took it without question, placed it in her mouth, and swallowed it slowly. As instructed, their time grew shorter. The commander had posted a new notice, one that did not say much but held enough cold meaning to freeze James in place. The alien was scheduled for transfer within 72 hours, and once she left the station, she would never be seen again, not by him, not by anyone who cared. James sat alone that night, his hands wrapped around a warm cup, his eyes staring at the stars through the glass, and he remembered the first time he saw her, the way she looked like a shadow of sorrow locked behind light and metal, and how that look had changed with time into something brighter, something stronger. She had become more than a mission, more than a mystery. She had become someone who mattered. He stood up, walked out, and did not look back. The final plan began at 0200, when most of the station was asleep, and only 2 guards stood near the lower deck. James triggered a silent overload in one of the fuel pumps, forcing the systems to reroute power for a full 15 minutes, enough to drop the cell locks into safety. Kari waited in the dark, her heart racing, her hands tight around the tool James had given her. The moment the lights flickered, she moved like water through the narrow door into the hall where James waited with a long coat and a mask in his hands. He placed the mask on her gently and wrapped the coat around her small body. Together they walked like shadows, past the half-sleeping guards, past the broken scanner, past the cold metal gate, into the old cargo bay, where the shell waited in silence, its door half open like the mouth of a secret cave. James opened the pod and lifted Kari inside. She looked at him, her eyes wide and full, not with fear but with something deeper, something close to sadness and something close to love. He checked the seal, the fuel, the path, everything twice, then thrice, then looked at her one last time and placed a small object in her hand, a folded paper with stars drawn in ink. She touched his hand gently, then pressed it to her chest, and James stepped back and pressed the launch code. The pod slipped into the dark like a stone into deep water, leaving only silence behind. James watched the stars, then turned and walked away. The pod flew through the dark like a whisper, like a secret, finally free from the metal grip of the station, leaving only a faint heat trail behind it. Inside the pod, Kari sat still, wrapped in the old coat James had given her, her hands clenched around the small folded paper with stars, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. Back inside the station, alarms began to cry out, long and loud. Lights flashed red across the decks as voices shouted through the intercom and boots slammed against steel floors. The guards found the empty cell, the broken lock, the missing key card, and the words "unauthorized launch" scrolled across every screen in flashing yellow. James Carter stood near the lower deck hallway, surrounded by 3 officers, their weapons drawn, their faces tight with anger and confusion and fear. He raised his hands, slowly saying nothing, his face calm but his thoughts racing like fire through dry leaves. They dragged him to the command center, where the commander stared at him with sharp, cold eyes like glass under pressure, like a blade waiting to cut. He demanded to know where the alien had gone, where the pod was headed, who helped her, who else knew. But James only looked at him and said one thing: she was just a child. The commander shouted orders, called for intercept ships, sent coordinates to patrol cruisers stationed in nearby sectors. Every eye on the station watched the screen as small red dots moved toward the last known location of the escape pod. Every voice spoke in urgency and anger and fear. Kari's pod moved fast, but the pursuers were faster, designed for combat, sleek and deadly like metal predators with wings. She felt the pull of the engines, the low hum beneath her feet, and she held the paper tighter to her chest, her fingers shaking but her eyes steady. She remembered every drawing, James had shown her every route, every symbol, every warning. He had said they would come. He had said they would not let her go easily. He had said, trust your heart, and fly. She entered the first code. James gave her a reroute command that led the pod into a nearby asteroid field, thick with stone and shadow. The engines cut low, the lights dimmed. The pod drifted silently between the rocks like a ghost hiding in the graveyard of old worlds. Patrol ships followed fast, but the field was dense and dangerous. Their scanners lost her signal, their vision blocked by the spinning stones. They spread out, searching each corner of the field, while Carrie held her breath and waited and hoped. Back on the station, James sat in a cell, small and cold, and watched from a screen built into the wall. One of the officers had left it on by mistake, or perhaps on purpose. He saw the ships moving, he saw the field spinning, he saw the red dots scatter and blink. He whispered to himself, fly, little star, fly. Commander entered the cell with slow steps, his face calm, now too calm, like still water before a deep storm. He spoke of law, of betrayal, of treason. He said James had thrown away his life for something that did not belong in this galaxy, something that would never be accepted, never be trusted, never be forgiven. James looked up and smiled. Maybe she does not need to. Beatty. Commander frowned and turned away, leaving. The door opened behind him, and James alone with his thoughts and the silence that followed out in the field. Carrie reached the edge of the rocks and engaged the next set of coordinates. A deep jump into an uncharted lane, away from known space, away from war, from noise, from hunters. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, just like James had shown her, each button pressed with care and courage. The pod charged, the engine sparked, and with one last flash of light it vanished into the void, beyond the charts, beyond the scanners, beyond the reach of those who would cage her again. The patrol ships circled, but found nothing but cold stone and silence. They sent reports filled with failure, and the commander read them with clenched fists and frozen breath. Carrie was gone. James sat in his cell and closed his eyes and saw stars. He saw her face the way it looked the first time. She smiled, not with her mouth, but with her whole being, like the rising of a quiet sun, and he felt no regret, no fear, only peace, because she had escaped, because she was free, and that was enough. Far away in the dark, Carrie opened the folded paper again, the one James had given her before the launch, the one with stars drawn by hand, and in the middle one small message written in shaky Earth script. Even if you are alone in the dark, the stars will always know your name. She smiled and flew on. The stars were quiet as the pod drifted into unknown space, a sea of light and shadow, without names or numbers, a place untouched by war or fear, a place that felt like a beginning. Carrie sat in the center of the small pod, her knees drawn to her chest, her eyes on the stars, and her hands holding the folded message that had become her light. She had escaped the cold walls of the station, the eyes that saw her as nothing more than a threat, the voices that called her a monster. She had flown past patrol ships and scanners and locked doors, and now she was free, but freedom felt like silence, and silence felt like memory. She remembered James Carter, the way he moved without noise, the way he brought her light without fear, the way he listened to her drawings like they were words written in gold, the way he never asked for anything but gave everything he could. And now he was somewhere behind her, maybe locked away, maybe alone, maybe punished for kindness, but he had given her a path. He had trusted her with Starscari. Tapped the panel in front of her. The controls blinked to life, showing maps that James had loaded before, launch maps of old systems, hidden worlds, places where no patrol ships flew, where old colonies had failed, where silence reigned and life might wait in the cracks. She picked one far on the edge, a green world with soft rings and deep lakes, marked as abandoned by old surveys. James had left a message in its coordinates, just one word in his writing, home. She followed the signal across the dark, through small jumps and narrow paths, hiding her trace with every move, using every trick James had taught her. And when the green world came into view, she gasped, her breath caught in wonder. The rings spun like silver. Waves and clouds moved slowly across the surface like dreams. The pod entered orbit, and she guided it down gently across the sky like a falling star landing near a wide lake that shimmered like glass, with trees that bent in the wind like dancers. Her feet touched soft earth for the first time in what felt like forever, and the wind smelled like leaves and life. She stepped out, wrapped in the old coat, still holding the message in her hand, her eyes wide with wonder, her heart beating like a Song she did not know the words to. She looked around, slowly searching the sky for more pods for danger, but there was only peace and birds and light. She walked across the land, planting small markers as James had shown her, calling out with gentle signals, hoping someone might hear. Not the soldiers, not the ones who hunted, but others, maybe like her. Maybe lost, maybe kind days. Passed slowly, she built a shelter from the pod pieces, used the tools to grow food from seed packets James had placed in her escape bag, and each night she sat under the stars and opened the folded paper again. Even if you are alone in the dark, the stars will always know your name. One evening, while collecting water near the lake, she saw something in the sky, a soft blue flash, like a comet, moving slow and steady, not fast, like a weapon, not loud, like a ship, just quiet and sure. And as it landed far across the hills, her heart rose with hope. She waited near her signal post, hands shaking, wondering if it was danger or answer, if it was fear or family. And when they arrived, they were small like her, with eyes like silver and skin that shimmered like moonlight. They stepped from their craft and looked at her with wonder. She stepped forward slowly, her hands open, her voice shaking, her translator buzzing quietly with the words James had left in its memory, the words she could now speak. I am Carrie and I come in peace. The aliens looked at each other, then nodded, and one stepped forward, placing a hand over their heart and speaking in a soft voice. You are welcome, she cried, then not with fear but with relief, not with sorrow but with joy. And in that moment she felt James beside her, not in body but in every breath, every word, every star above, far across the galaxy. Inside a cold station cell, James Carter lay back against the wall, his eyes closed, his breath slow but steady. He had not spoken in days, but when a technician passed by the cell and muttered something about a strange signal from an old colony world, his eyes opened just a little. He smiled, not with his mouth but with his soul, because he knew she had made it. She had lived. She had become more than a prisoner, more than a shadow, more than a name in a locked file. She had become a story written in stars, and somewhere on that green world Carrie began to write her own.